so that this event can be available for folks that weren't able to make it tonight, but would like to be engaged in the content later. So welcome to You Better Work, Job Safety and Search Tips for Trans Students, a part of the Visiting Speaker Series in the Transgender Spectrum Initiative out of the Gender and Sexuality Center at the University of San Francisco. This was made possible by the Jesuit Foundation grant. We're going to get started with some introductions. So I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Juno Chambers. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm the graduate coordinator for the Gender and Sexuality Center within the Cultural Centers at USF. And I'm also a second-year master's student in the School of Education. I'll pass it to Lionel to introduce himself.
I'm Lionel Daggs. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm one of the assistant directors of the Cultural Centers, and my work is primarily centered in our Gender and Sexuality Center.
And CY?
Hello, y'all. I'm CY. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am a program manager here at Cultural Centers and support both the Intercultural Center and also Gender and Sexuality Centers.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And just to give some context of our event for tonight, we'll be starting with a welcome, doing a land acknowledgement, and continuing with some community agreements. We'll be grounding this event in values with the opening blessing and Jesuit theology, following up. Oh, community agreements was on there twice. Oh, well, that's why you always double check your word. And then, no, what we'll do is we'll move into some panelist introductions, and then we'll go into the Q&A with some already generated questions, and then move into some breakout rooms from there. So thank you all for being here, and I will pass it to Lionel.
So I'm going to just read the land acknowledgement statement and give a bit of an explanation around why we do this. So this is traditionally incorporated actually into most major events and major ceremonies that happen on campus. And so the University of San Francisco sits on Ohlone land. Today we cannot deny the story of this land and its truth that is too often untold. Today we gather on unceded, stolen Ohlone territory. The village of Yelamu is the territory of the Ramaytush-speaking people, one of 8 nations now referred to as Ohlone. Even through devastating events, the Yelamu are still here and working tirelessly for their right to remain and involve in the place we consider San Francisco. Many of us who have come to benefit from this land still participate in the ongoing displacement of its original stewards, but we can choose to be better advocates and accomplices in favor of their restoration. So this statement was written by Kalina Lawrence from the Suquamish Nation, former PASJ alumna and a USF class of 2016. I know folks are joining us from all over the United States and I think potentially the globe. So I would suggest that everyone actually take the time to research the native and indigenous land that they exist on as a part of just kind of like building awareness and building knowledge of kind of the indigenous people that you are connected to and impacting on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Lionel. And connected to that, I added to the chat a website that will allow you to know the indigenous land that you are on. So you can engage in this land acknowledgement, recognizing that we are not all joining from the same space today. And I will pass it to CY.
Yeah, thank you, Juno. We will start, as we're starting this event, we'll start with a prayer blessing, and just to ground ourselves in the space as we recognize and try to uplift the voices from our trans and non-binary folks in the community. So I invite us all to take a few deep breaths and recognize the space you're in, and recognize all the people in this space that we're with. our mother and father, our beloved parent, in whom we move and breathe and have our being. The hallowing of your name shines forth in the diversity of your children. May your peace and love, justice and equity, inclusion and belonging reign here on earth as in heaven. Grant that your trans and non-binary loved ones might have their daily needs met, that they might find gainful employment without discrimination, that they might have access to medical care without fear, that they might have their rights and lives protected, and that they might find a loving community to belong to and call their own. Forgive us the ways that we have fallen short and failed your trans and non-binary children. Forgive us the times that we turned away or did not care, for the times we judged their unique expression of your image, for the times we have misspoken, asked for too much, or failed to hear. As we forgive those who might have failed us, lead us away from the temptation to be complacent in the face of injustice, but instead give us courage to stand up and stand with your beloved children, for your love and justice is to be made manifest now and forever. Amen. Next slide, please. Yeah, I want to recognize that in the event today that we want to lift up the trans voices and in general, and also we have a lot of students in the space, and so Jesuits is a Catholic Jesuit university, and so I want to offer a little bit something that make this university special and in relationship to today's discussion. So one thing is very Jesuit Ignatian practice is this thing called Ignatian Discernment, and essentially is making decisions, but making the decisions big and small every day, and lead us to become who we really are. So maybe every decisions that we make to every day will lead us to be that very person, the most authentic being of who we are. So the discernment process highlights two different movements of our hearts. So one thing is consolation, the other is desolation. And consolation means that when we are most ourselves, like most authentically ourselves, most connected, and make us the better person that we want to be. So those moments that when your heart's feeling that thing is moving towards that better self is called consolation. And desolation is the opposite. When you feel disintegration, you feel like you feel frustrated, you feel inability, inaction, and that's desolation. And that require a little bit like sharpening your senses. So today in the discussion, we will hear different stories, different information and data, and which I will encourage us all, in addition to using your five senses about what you see, what you hear, and what that kind of information. I encourage you always also use your sixth sense. Sixth sense meaning that the sense that understanding or feeling the interior movements, and what kind of give you more energy, and what on the other hand draw away your energy. So here I offer a explanation or a poem kind of describe what that looks like. So this is a poem written by Pedro Arrupe. He's a Jesuit. He was a leader of the Jesuit worldwide. So I'll read the poem, and hopefully that describe what that might look like. I encourage us all in the space to do. Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. That you are in love with, what you are in love with, what seizes your imagination will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning and what you do in your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. So on this journey of exploring who we are and finding the job, the work that will most fulfilling for ourselves, and may we also, all of us can find that thing that make us most authentically who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, TY. And, you know, and being at a Jesuit Catholic institution and grounding it here, you know, we want to make sure that folks are engaging in their most authentic selves and engaging, you know, in that process as well. So thank you for grounding that. Also, sorry for the truck in the background. But we're going to move on to our community agreements. So our community agreements are shared squared. So that includes, you know, sharing the space and sharing your voice. So, you know, if you are finding that you're talking more or, you know, may exist in a different positionality that places you in a different privilege, make sure that you're sharing the space for others to talk and also as well sharing your voice. We are also engaging in the brave space. So, you know, we are all learning here. So, you know, challenging by choice and entering the conversation with civility and respect so that, you know, we can all grow, but also recognizing that, you know, in our next community agreement, intent and impact, that, you know, we are all learning, but some things might be said that might have a different impact than folks might have intended. So owning that intention and being open to that conversation and dialogue. We are also listening to understand, as you know, CY had mentioned that folks will be sharing different experiences and just knowledge, and we are, you know, here to be in a space to build community and knowledge with each other. So, you know, listening to understand each other and what where we're coming from. Another huge part of this is planting the seed. So recognizing that this conversation is the start of many, and that, you know, it doesn't end and it only begins here. It doesn't end here. So, you know, we'll be planting the seed and then nourishing that throughout the conversation, and then as we leave the space as well. And then confidentiality is our last community agreement. So, you know, recognizing that sensitive information might be shared in this space. So taking the lessons that are learned here and leaving any identifying information in this space and respecting the vulnerability and transparency that folks are bringing into this event today. Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to take some time to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to stop sharing from here so that I can pin folks, everyone's wonderful faces. Let's see, spotlight, and then, sorry, add spotlight, and there we go. So, hi everyone, and we are going to get started in the moderated Q&A portion of our section, and I'll take some time to introduce our panelists. So first we have Zakir McKenzie Papaya, or Zach, found his way to youth development and nonprofit work via the youth athletics world, coaching kindergarten t-ball and fourth grade boys' lacrosse as a college student. While teaching preschool, Pee Wee sports and movement, his first assignment as a full-time youth athletics coordinator, Zach discovered his love and talent for putting youth development theory into practice, whether on the field or in the classroom. His love of youth development has evolved into an unwavering commitment to support and develop high-quality youth development professionals, programs, and resources. As the director of programs at CalSAC, Zach oversees leadership development programming from fellowships to 3-day workshop intensives and works closely with training and capacity building programming, from online learning to statewide learning networks. He also leads statewide equity initiatives in partnership with the California Department of Education and other statewide technical assistance providers. Zach grew up in the rainy Pacific Northwest and landed in the Bay Area in 2001 to study sociology, gender and sexuality, and business at the University of San Francisco. Zach has spent his career honing best practices for cultivating learning environments for youth and adults alike that center self-reflection, deepen self-awareness, and ultimately elevate a critical consciousness. His lived experience as a man of trans experience and a person of color informs how he moves in the world and his commitment to a compassionate intersectional analysis of youth development, leadership practices, and anti-oppression efforts. Zach is passionate about designing and supporting educational opportunities in which youth and adults are challenged intellectually and loved unconditionally. Outside of work, you can find him on biking adventures, listening to podcasts while working on puzzles, cooking, or reading a good book. He recently moved to Portland, Oregon with his wife, dog, and cat to be close to the family. In November 2020, they welcomed their first human child, Maya Anjali, into the world. He is quickly adjusting to fatherhood. Thank you, Zach, for being here today. And next, I'll introduce Letziad Seat. Letziad Seat is a fierce, fat, and femme trans Latino writer, storyteller, and stand-up comedian, best known for her sassy, incisive, feminist comedy style, rooted in themes that advance social justice. Heavily influenced by Kamau Ball and Harry Kondabolu, she guides audiences through journeys of healing and transformation. An artist, arts producer, and managing director of the Trans Women and Femme of Color centered East Oakland-based arts group, Peacock Rebellion. She has co-led the group recently named to the 2017 YBCA 100 Yerba Buena Center of the Arts annual list of the 100 people, organizations, and movements who are shaping the future of culture. She has performed stand-up comedy, sketch comedy, spoken word, and storytelling in Peacock Rebellion's Brouhaha 2016 Best of the East Bay winner for most historic cultural event, Man-Hater's 2016 winner of Best of the East Bay for Best Comedy Show, American Repertory Theater at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the News at Soma Arts as part of the National Queer Arts Festival, Stay in Oakland, Cutie Pot Resilience Festival, and most recently, the Dyke March stage in San Francisco. The writing has been featured on Salon.com, Ostrostraddle, and in the upcoming anthology, Trapdoor, Transcultural Production and the Politics of Visibility. It's a great book. Y'all should check it out. She critically examines transgender women of color, social justice movements, art, cultural production, adoption, and neoliberalism. Thank you, Letzi, so much for being here today. And then next, I will introduce Juniper Angelica. Juniper Angelica Gia Cordova is a queer trans Latina mother and community organizer living in the Bay Area, originally from El Monte, California. Juniper Angelica is currently the Associate Director of Gender Justice Leadership Programs at GSA Network and Transgender Law Center based in Oakland. Her work with TLC and GSA Network centers the leadership and power of trans and non-binary youth and is creating space for youth power to lead us toward safer schools and future for our people. Juniper Angelica attended Citrus College, class of 2016, and then transferred to UC Berkeley, class of 2019. She majored in ethnic studies with a minor in race and law. Shout out to community colleges and public schools. Juniper Angelica is raising a 7-year-old named Tiger, the center of her world. Thank you so much for being here today, Juniper Angelica. Awesome. Well, I am going to ask the first question, and then whoever wants to go can feel free to go for it. And then we'll just keep going from there. So let's see. Sorry, y'all. Things are all over the place. So in your work, how does your work relate to your identity?
I can kick us off. Cool. Well, thanks so much for making this space and having us. I'm super excited to see this panel put together and to be part of the conversation. And in terms of how my identity relate to my work. I think from the start, my work with these two organizations really started when I was in high school as like a young trans person trying to start a GSA club. And I had really just reached out to GSA Network to say like, I need help. My school isn't working with me. And from there, I think I just kind of stayed connected and interacted with queer and trans youth organizing. And I think for me, it just kind of, I wouldn't say it became like my career, because I feel like not only is, I don't know if organizing is a career, but also like I'm so young. So I feel like I'm very early in like where I'm actually trying to get toward. But for now, I think this work really just speaks to my continued like dedication to making like this world safer for people who look like me and sound like me. I think when I started this in high school, this was like, how can I change the world around me, which is like my high school campus. Now as an organizer on staff, I think it's the same thing, but just on a wider platform in terms of how can I support other trans and queer youth in doing that and doing just that and making the communities around them safer. So I would say this work is connected, because it started as like my answer back to the world as a trans person of like, I'm gonna do what I can to push back. And now I think it's stayed connected because I very much still very much am still trans, but also very much I'm still dedicated to working with my people and doing what I can to like help us build power for our people.
Thank you.
Want to go, Lexi? You want me to go?
Do you want to go? Do you want me to go?
I can jump in. I think that
Okay.
I'll kind of keep my response a little bit shorter. So, the work that I'm doing right now is in youth development. And so I would say the way that it relates to my identity is maybe just more broadly holding identities that are, typically marginalized, underrepresented. And I think it shows up the most in, I've been fortunate enough to work at an organization that is really committed to like living into and practicing values that are and practices that are equity oriented, and a space that is friendly for all, and actually takes care of people on multiple levels, like policy levels as well as interpersonally. And I've had queer bosses and colleagues as well. And so in that sense, like the work that we're doing is much more, I think, ties into identities I hold that are, being a person of color, being queer and kind of navigating the world. And it shows up more in the leadership development work that we do. So supporting leaders to be counter dominant and kind of question the status quo. And I think that's where my authentic identity gets to show up, because we incorporate a lot of storytelling and really encourage people to be their full selves. I think outside of that, the field is still really growing in terms of incorporating more queer and trans identity elements into, particularly the resources that we have. So I think it's much more personal in the way that the work relates to, my intersecting identity, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you.
And yeah, so my day job is as a fundraiser for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. It's one of the oldest LGBTQ legal organizations in the country. The first one to be women founded, and they have a really incredible history of just fighting for and making a lot of people's lives better in our community. Similar to Juniper Angelica, I started organizing in high school as well with GSA Network. So it's always funny because I watched her come up after me. And yeah, after that, just stayed involved in social justice movements and tried to find ways to turn that into, I don't want to say a career, but like a job, and being able to help my folks out while also being able to like still do the work that I thought was important. Um So I currently work as a fundraiser during the day. I also recently started a media company called AdSense Media. And I am co-editing an anthology called Paradise on the Margins, Lessons and Dreams from Trans Women of Color, which hopefully will be out in the next year or two. And so, yeah, in some ways, my identity is very vital to like the anthology work, the media work that I do. But for my day job, it's more about being a part of this movement that's bigger than myself. Um, and that's really about trying to make people's lives better through the legal system. Uh, and we also do like public education and other stuff. It's not exclusively uh, impact legislation. It's also really cool because I'm not a lawyer. I never wanted to be a lawyer. So I get to learn all this legal stuff, and sometimes it's fun, and other times it's really frustrating. So yeah, but that's me. Nice to meet you all and see all of you.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering and like sharing, how you enter this work and where your identity like really informs and infuses and like is really integral to that work. So thank you all for sharing. And connected to this question is how do y'all feel in your field as a trans person? And recognizing that like some of the work is connected into social justice and identity, but still recognizing that we are in a society. So how do you, what is your experience and how do you feel in your field as a trans person?
I can start since I just went. It's how do I put this? It's hard. There are definitely different challenges that you face. And this will differ, right? Because like for me as Latina, I often get, I don't want to say marked, but like seen as like spicy, or because I don't take shit from people and because I like the cultural communication styles that a lot of white colleagues have is very different from my own. Um, and so it's not always just about like being trans, but also I work with like all cis, for the most part, all cis people who are lawyers and just aren't trans. And that's I can't say that I've worked with a lot of trans people unless it was an organization that was like founded and run by trans people. Which there are a couple of those, and I did work with Zach for a little bit at CalSAC, and uh, but yeah, it's hard to it's a challenge. I'm sure Juniper Angelica and Zach will tell you a little bit more too.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I I think in some ways there is an ease with which I navigate my working life and life in general, just as someone who's sort of much more binary, and um, I'm able to have some of the markers of a man, that just I'm not misgendered anymore, and that protects me in a lot of ways and creates a lot of ease to navigate spaces on the surface. And I think that the real complexity is much more internal. Is the out of school time, after school field, which is where my organization does most of our work, is like shockingly like hetero. I feel like I'm still so surprised at how maybe it's just the folks just aren't out and loud about it, because it feels super heteronormative. And so I walk through the world sometimes in queer spaces feeling like I feel a little too straight. And then I think in super straight spaces, I feel like, whoa, I am so much more queer. And so the hardest pieces to navigate have been during like navigating relationships with cis men who knew me prior to transitioning. There are still people who to this day like accidentally misgender me, and it's just like so infuriating. And that really never stops being like an extremely hurtful thing that happens. And I would say I've been at an organization that's hugely supportive and had bosses that are super supportive. Like actually have talked to funders who were being really inappropriate and misgendering me, like really have stood by me. And so that has helped. And then being a part of a team that is super queer, really thoughtful, really like grounded in equitable practices, and that has helped. And so that I think insulates me from those moments where out in the broader field, I feel a little bit like, you know, a dimension of my identity is just kind of has to be invisible. And or that I need to perform my masculinity in a certain way so that I don't creep back towards being misgendered, which is, you know, sort of an ongoing like thing that takes up space in my brain. Yeah, but overall in the field, I think like in the leadership development spaces that I get to be in with other leaders of color, I feel very full and whole in those spaces. And so it has just been also around like being authentic when I can and forging those kinds of relationships. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think that for the longest time, I very much stayed in, like once I found queer and trans organizing and I was like, oh, people in the world are like, you know, this is like what you do, you're working toward making the world better. I think once I found that, I stuck with it because I believed in like, I believed in my own power of transforming the world around me. And I believed in like working with others with shared values. I think what I'm realizing after being in like queer nonprofits for the time I've been for about like 5 or 6 years, I very much am noticing like I like there's a limitation and a fear of me ever exiting queer and trans organizing strictly because I'm trans, like strictly because like this might be the best place I can exist because like there's so many others around me. And I'll say there's definitely a spectrum of those experiences, right? Like I think I've only ever really felt safe in the workplace or in the field when I was like in a room of only other queer, of only other trans people of color, right? Like that's as close as I've gotten to feeling like safe and seen and not under pressure to perform, and just like I was able to exist. And you know, I think to a certain extent, I also feel that comfort around or like in like general queer spaces, but I still want to like name that, like I feel like as a trans person I've still struggled to like, you know, totally feel safe, because I feel like even within queer spaces, is my identity like questioned, or am I misgendered, or you know, like shit like that happens that I'm like, I thought this wasn't what we were working toward. So you know, I think overall as a person in like the, I guess, the field of like queer and trans movement organizing, you know, I think my experience like can depend on who's around me, and like are people like actually invested in like seeing me as I am, you know, and I feel like again it's in moments where I'm like with other trans women usually who like have understood enough about me to like not question me and to like see me as my whole self without needing explanation. But that doesn't always like, you know, happen in like queer spaces that that include like cis queer people. And then, yeah, and I mentioned that fear, like limitation, because I think that I haven't been able to get a job or like find somewhere that I would even like feel remotely safe outside of like a trans organization, because like the one experience I have when I like my first job that was at like a hamburger place was just like, this is not for me. This is not for me. I can't be like that actively like in danger or misgendered by people I'm working with like on a daily basis. I need to get out. So you know, I feel a little limited in like in my experience because of what I'm like feeling safe enough to like venture into. But to answer your question in terms of like the field I'm currently in queer and trans organizing, you know, those are my experiences. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing like your experiences and like how you're entering. And Gia, I think that, you know, what you shared is a real reality that, you know, a lot of us exist in. And I don't think at all is limited at all. So thank you all for sharing. You know, connected to this conversation, and then also like thinking about it, because y'all have named insisting in spaces that is supportive and has allowed y'all for that growth. And also naming that there's a tension kind of like more broadly outside of like the direct area. How would you change like the fields more broadly to be more trans inclusive? I know is a huge thing. Like, I know, just end transphobia like right now. But yeah, just like in your experiences, like what did you see to like push things forward to be more inclusive of trans folks?
I can kick us off if that's okay. You know, I think what comes on like the top of my head is I feel like not the ease, I wouldn't even say, I wouldn't really label it. I just, one way that we can possibly support trans folks more is, you know, I think prioritizing like actual relationship building. I feel like the trans people and the non-trans people who get me the most are simply people who like care about me and like are actually invested in like making me feel safe and making me feel like I'm welcomed in this space. And I wanted to name that like that I have experienced that with non-trans people, but only the non-trans folks who have put in the work to really build a relationship with me. And I say that because I think even like within queer organizations or like organizations that are like majority queer folks, I feel like there can be like a surface level of allyship for trans folks of like, yeah, I'll use your name, I'll use your pronouns, but like it doesn't always go deeper than that. So when situations come up when like trans folks are feeling unsafe, like, and the cis people don't know what's happening, it's because like you don't understand like deeper than like my names and pronouns, right? Or like what my daily experiences are or what are common, you know, within our community. And I feel like that can be answered through folks who's really investing in building relationships, you know, across gender and really like investing in like seeing trans folks and who they are and like and all that includes, and being there for like all like the messiness and complexities of what it means to just be human and be in a relationship with each other. But I feel like until we do that and dig deeper, you know, like solidarity it's gonna pause at just like, you know, names and pronouns, which are definitely important and big barriers and things that folks should be working toward. But I think that if we deepen it, then like the ways to show up become more evident, become more easy to go toward.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll go. Yeah, not the easiest question to answer. I will say part of the reality of like the some of the fields that we're in are that LGBTQ nonprofits get like a 1% of philanthropy funding that comes through each year. And we're talking like billions of dollars, right? So any for a lot of trans people, I know this was true for me when I was just starting out, is that you really have to take on that like professional facade. You have to play the game to kind of get your foot in the door, and it sucks. It can suck really hard. It's just kind of the nature of like capitalism and organizing and not organizing, like labor and work. And I've primarily worked in nonprofits for most of my life. I've also spent a lot of time in academia and public health. Um, and so I think some of the things that would make the field more or any field more trans inclusive are still the things that like we need as laborers. And it's like making sure that you can have an affordable cost of living, and that you're getting like actual support from your boss, and that you're treated holistically and as human as possible. Yeah, it's hard. I think it's hard to, at least for me, also, for me, it's been hard to find a job and stay in a job that's like consistent, because they're just not always the easiest. Um, and yeah, some of that's due to like transphobia and kind of being pushed out of spaces, and being trying to like bring up feedback in ways that like are suddenly seen as aggressive or invalid. And other times it's because I just couldn't take it anymore. So it depends on what kind of field you're interested in and what you want to go into. But yeah, trying to find a way to stick with it can be more beneficial in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
I really agree with what folks have already shared, and I think the piece around building relationships and storytelling and like just really actually knowing one another has made a big difference in the field that I'm in. I think there is still a lot of the sort of more performative, write your pronouns on name tags and underneath your email signature and stuff, and it really doesn't sometimes go a whole lot further than that. And I think in an institution structure like education broadly, like there's so many structures that are super binary, and the programs that I've heard that are like addressing that head on are programs that have trans kids. And that program was, I think, the real value of an out of school time, after school space is that often young people are really celebrated for who they are. They're doing things they love. The adults they have strong relationships with the adults. And so in a lot of ways, that space for young people is a place that can really lead the way on what it looks like to engage young people in these conversations around their gender identity, around the expansiveness of it. And then I'm getting wind of more of those conversations happening in early care and education as well. So helping teachers better understand gender expression in their preschoolers and in their little ones who are who will really benefit. All little ones will benefit from having a teacher who like understands how that binary operates and how it sorts young ones. And because my perspective is a lot on like supporting adults who work with young people, I do really feel like there's a lot of power in educators having some personal exploration of their gender and gender identity and socialization. And I think there's just a lot of space for allyship that's a little less performative than it has become right now. And I think with that said, like the being trans inclusive, I think is also about like sort of feels a little chicken and egg, because like if you're creating a safe enough program, you'll know the vast, the spectrum of identities you have in staff, and then that will become inevitably part of what you're doing and part of your program. But if that, and then you can develop better policies and practices. And so I think there are some leaders and spotlighting them. And I think I always come back to just supporting people that have a personal practice of reflecting on how they were socialized, so that they, even if they're cis and happily in their gender box, that they actually understand that it's a box. That it's shocking how little time folks have had to reflect on that and how eye-opening it is. And so more of those types of spaces for people to do that reflection feels like one step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really feel y'all on that. And completely agree that it's, relationship building and community building that really, helps to fight against the sexism and the dehumanization that us as trans people face in the workspace. So in connection to that, in the relationship building and the guidance, who has supported you through your career process?
I can go first. A lot of women of color, whether they're trans or cis, they are usually the ones who really show up and see me and are really validating. I was gonna try and think of an actual story, but I have a hard time thinking of one right now. Um, but yeah, it's I there have been a lot of times for me in my life where I didn't give people the benefit of the doubt and kind of learned later on that they were actually being really supportive and really helpful. Um, and so it's important to kind of take that chance and I think like really trust your intuition in terms of figuring out what people are like, how people are supporting you and whether it feels good or not. Um, but yeah, a lot of women of color. Just really solidarity and finding folks who you can be in solidarity with across like identities. I think is always important to being in a good workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to jump in before the other panelists, sorry. Your answer, reminds me of Leah Lakshmi Samrasina Piepsna, like writing in Dirty River, one of her collections, that like women of color all around me, supporting and nourishing me. And I just like that quote like stuck out to me. And I like actually like made it into a gift for like my former supervisor, who's a amazing queer Black woman. But yeah, really feeling you that women of color have been huge support.
Yeah, I can add on to that, and very much co-sign that. I feel like if I were to like list out all the people who've had a positive impact, like majority, if not all of them, are going to be women of color, mostly trans women. I think, and I think going back to like just like the whole relationship building, I feel like the first people who sought me out and were like, we're gonna invest in you, like, and I mean, like, by invest I mean like we're gonna offer you my home, right? So like, when I experienced homelessness in high school, the people who took me in and like offered me housing while I was in college were drag queens who, and I mean, like, for my young queer self, that was heaven, right? But looking back, it's like that it was those moments where folks were, with or without like pay, whether it was like because they're my supervisor or just because they care about me. It was a matter of like, we're gonna invest in you because we know the world isn't. And usually it was trans women of color who were taking that time. um, and again, that just speaks to like the power that communities can build when they're under attack, and like the strength that we build just by simply like building our connections with each other first. So I'll say that, and I also think that I also want to give credit to GSA Network, which is the organization that I'm working with, and I say that because I feel like the organization has done work to actually invest in like a leadership pipeline that feels tangible, right? And I speak to that only because, you know, I started in the organization as like a youth participant, and then came back like to support with a program, and since then I felt my leadership invested in a way that feels like I'm actually prepared and ready to make new steps, and to grow in my leadership. I'll say that every organization has a work to do, and I think, you know, as like a non-trans led organization, I think there's a whole bunch we can do, to just boost our work with our trans and non-binary employees. But I feel like also part of building a leadership pipeline within organizations or within like social structures also includes like bringing those impacted folks in to help further push that climate to change, right? So, you know, as I'm growing in my leadership, as a trans person, I'm able to also impact the climate around me and be like, cool, like we've gotten really good at doing all these things, but here's all of the places that we can improve, through, you know, through my experience, or through my shared experience. So I would say that there's individuals who have loved and invested in important to me, and also I think the importance of like organizations actually committing to investing in leadership and growing up folks, especially youth organizers, I think is also important in this equation of, making this world like safer and better for trans folks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate, and I've been at the same organization for the last coming up on 11 years. And 6 months into that job, I started T and started my transition, and was really, really supported by my boss. Both bosses that I had at the time were queer, women of color, people of color, and I've stayed in that environment, and I think that probably has a lot to do with it. But I think just being in an organization that actually wants to practice these and look closely at issues of equity, and isn't afraid to sort of say, like, we've been getting this wrong, let's work on this, is actually really celebrated the power and the strength of diversity. And then the team contributes a lot to how the overall culture is inclusive and caring. And I think that has that being a home base has helped a lot, and having a boss with sort of an unwavering commitment to, you know, inclusion, equity, diversity, all, you know, really looking closely at like the various privileges we hold, and the voices that are not being heard. It was definitely just transformational for me. And I think just having that home base has helped me be able to kind of venture away and be developing my career. And I think it has a ton to do with also stepping into male privilege and sort of living in a trans body that is binary. And so in those ways, I think my career development certainly has some elements of, you know, what's been bestowed upon me and my voice as a man. And so that can't be discounted too. That has been really real from my experience as well.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So now we're gonna wrap up into our last question before we break out into some deeper diving with our students. How do y'all navigate power dynamics within the space and negotiate your safety? Yeah, I know that it's a big question, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can try it out first. And I want to start off by saying, like, I feel like I'm still very much learning like how to navigate power dynamics. I feel like, and there's so many that I'm like having to navigate both both where I'm like not the more powerful one, but also now situations as like a supervisor where I do have more power in certain ways. So I feel like I'm always in like learning mode, which I welcome, which I'm like, I think I will be in the learning mode. But I think two things that I have come to mind with the question is, one, I've learned, so like two things that I've learned. One is I've learned that I very much deserve everything. I deserve, like, I think we all deserve like stable housing. We deserve pleasure. We deserve joy. We deserve abundance. And I believe that as like just like as a human being, right? Outside of all of the things that we produce or perform, I believe that. And most importantly, I believe that for myself. And I think once I started to actually like believe it, although it didn't always translate into like me defending myself or me pushing up against someone when I should have. I think it justifies and like works me toward that position where I can start doing that more often. Because I noticed like a very stark change of like where I very much never used to question authority or question the status quo. To now it's like now I feel like I feel justified when I do it, and like and even if I don't always do, because I'm so scared in navigating like power dynamics and maintaining my job. There are more moments where I feel more brave and I can step into that and hold folks accountable or push back when I'm not feeling good, right? And I've really gotten good at trusting my gut, because I think my mind can work really quickly to like gaslight myself, and I'm like, no. If my gut is saying something, that there has to be something there. So the first thing I learned is like I deserve it, and I deserve to fight for myself, and I do more than I used to. The other one is that, you know, I've gotten also really good at holding or trying to hold folks accountable based on the values that they've said they're trying to follow, right? So on the individual level, if my boss has said like he's working on these few things and then he's not, then like I very much have started to use that and be like, homie, like this is what you told me you're working on, this is not what you're showing me, right? And again, these are like I'm not always brave enough, or I can't always push back, but when I do, I've really found I really found supporting others and reflecting on their own values as like a helpful tool, and like navigating like and connecting that like actually we have the same kind of values and we should be on the same page. How can we get there? And I think I've learned that on the individual level, but almost more effectively on the organizational level, as my organizations have started to like, you know, develop policies or develop ways that they're verbally committing to change. I'm able to like therefore like use those policies to say like is this, are we actually seeing like in action, or like can we challenge ourselves to do a little more? So I think that's been a helpful tool, and very much like it's been helpful to help to push others to be accountable, as well as like to hold myself accountable and being like, what are the values I'm pushing out, and am I doing it for myself, both like as a worker, but also as a parent, right? Like, and my kid will call me out and he will let me know when I'm not living to the values that I'm saying our household holds. So, you know, I think again, when I'm like in a learning mode and in all my relationships to just really reconnect to my values and help others also connect to theirs, because majority of the time we're on the same kind of wavelength.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I think there were stretches of time where I, was shrinking away a little bit from the power that I had, and I think it was from a place of, in transitioning to male, not wanting to take up too much space, and I think that has evolved more into a much more nuanced like analysis and understanding of how to leverage like unearned power and privilege for in the right ways, to make more space to model to others in positions of power, other men particularly, like what it looks like to kind of examine sort of the power that's like bestowed upon somebody just by how they look. And I think it's still really hard. I think it's still really like enraging to witness white cis male power in the education world, and white women, cis women power too. I think it's sort of a ongoing struggle and effort to sort of live into my own values of building relationships and being like critical of systems and structures and kind and gentle with humans. I think that that's still really hard in some ways, and I think there's a lot of privilege that I have to be able to push on those people and not like lose my job, or or have like intense repercussions. So it's complex. I think it takes a lot of reflection time, and I feel again really fortunate to work at an organization that tries to encourage folks who have power to like examine closely how they're wielding it, and to do that with grace, to like be kind to yourself in those moments when you're not like speaking up, and wish you were more brave or courageous. There's definitely still a lot of moments of like spending a good chunk of time after an incident thinking of all the different things that I will say next time. That is a pretty common experience, and I think have colleagues who are also have shared with me that like I can practice more awareness of my power in spaces, and so I guess my reflection is just an ongoing analysis of power. Like I actually have a power document here, and just try to like do a little bit of digging into like frameworks really help me position myself and understand myself. I will say I think the analysis and understanding about how power operates, I would say like I think Juniper, Angelica, you mentioned this of just like understanding like how it operates, and yeah, just being able to sort of name it in language that people can hear you, and or like speak to somebody's values that you're not seeing. Those I think are really like kind and still really straightforward ways to ask folks to be thoughtful. So
Yeah, thank you.
Girl, power dynamics are messed up. Like and really it took me a long time to learn that it really comes down to communication. And part of that's like intent and impact, and part of it's also just about the way that you engage and talk to people. Um when I first came into my job now, there were a couple of instances of lawyers talking to me very lawyerly, and it was very short, and I understood it as a little abrasive. That of course was not their intent, but it was the impact. And so I was like, look, you can't talk to me this way, blah, blah, blah. Like, or else we're gonna have a problem. And then they changed the way they talk to me. Um, power dynamics are one of those hard things that you will, and most of you already have through, friends, family, being in school. Just learning how to navigate. And it's definitely a skill. And you have to remember that communication is a skill that you can always work on and improve on. And that your understanding of power and power dynamics is always something that you can expand and learn on. Um, but yeah, it don't I don't know how to say this, but like try not to like be intentionally malicious around power dynamics, because it's just not worth it, and it's just such an inherent part of an organization, whether it's a company or nonprofit or academia, yeah, there's always power dynamics you have to kind of navigate through.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I really appreciate y'all sharing your knowledge and your experience and how y'all have navigated it, because yeah, those power dynamics are nasty and gross and everywhere. And especially as trans people navigating them, it's like just taking like an extra step and breather to make sure that like we are okay and doing the work that we need to do. So thank you all for being honest and vulnerable and sharing during this Q&A session.